All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Um, we're really excited to have everybody here today. So I'm Kendall, and this is Aaliyah. You might see Shannon joining here in a little bit. He was having some power difficulties, so you might see him pop in here in just a second. So we're really excited to talk today with Aaliyah about how she transformed her project management system across her campus and what that looked like before and after. So, Aaliyah, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself here?
Hi, my name is Aaliyah Herman. I am the Creative and Web Services Director for Strategic Marketing Communications within UMKC. We actually follow a shared services model at our university, so everyone doing marketing communications is part of our team. And within my part of the team, that includes designers, writers, project managers, our web team. We have developers and editors on that side as well. And then we also have a photo and video team. So it's a kind of the whole creative side of the house. And then within our division, we also have strategic communications and marketing people.
Awesome.
Can you hear me, Kendall?
Yeah, Shannon jumped back on here. So
I am sorry about that. The power just went out about 1 minute before we walked in. So thank you, everybody. Go ahead and continue to introduce if you haven't, and then I'll jump in and kind of take over the reins, if you will.
So I'm Kendall. I'm the marketing lead here at Workzone. I have a lot of experience coming into organizations that have basically zero processes done and building all of those processes up from scratch. So I know how difficult it can be to really get that ball rolling and really get adoption across the team. And like, let's be honest here, if you can't get adoption across the team, it doesn't matter how much project management, doesn't matter how many systems you have. If adoption doesn't get through, then it's all going to fall apart. So we're excited to see how you did it there.
Yeah, thanks for introducing. And I'm not sure how much you said at the very start, but I wanted to thank everybody for joining today. We're going to do something a little bit unconventional today. Usually when you see these types of webinars, you'll see us on here either giving you some type of a demo or quote unquote a product pitch, right? We're not going to do that today. This is going to be a real conversation, really about what actually happens when project management starts to break and what it takes to fix that. And so thank you for introducing both of yourselves. I'll introduce myself too. I'm Shannon, and I've spent most of my career really working in marketing and operations with those teams, kind of how these problems show up and really how to solve for these problems that we're going to talk about today. And what we're going to talk about today really shows up everywhere. You know, teams start to grow. Work always gets harder to track, right? And I think all of us probably feel a lot of times that everything is always feeling like it's reactive. So, you know, the reason I think this conversation matters today is really because Aaliyah actually went through a lot of what we're going to talk about today. And so, you know, instead of us talking about what should happen, we're actually going to walk through what did happen. And so let's, without any further ado, kind of take a jump in and dive into the guts of the presentation. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide for me, Connor. And I think it might be 2 because of the speaker slide. Yes, there we go. Perfect. So before we get into what changed, I just want to level set with everybody really quick and just kind of start with what this usually looks like across organizations and teams. Now, most teams don't usually fix something until it forces them to, right? We're all kind of like this, you know, not really a big problem. But then when the problem comes forward and we're forced to, we have to address it, right? And these are things like deadlines getting missed start to bubble up, or something gets duplicated. And, you know, I've been in so many situations in the past where we'll have one team who's working on know that there's another team in the organization working on the exact same thing, right? So there's all this duplication because they're just not having visibility across those teams and they're not seeing what's going on. And then this is a big one, right? Leadership will always ask a question and you really don't have a clear answer. Like how many of us, I've done in the past, we'll get asked a question and we just don't know the answer. And that's kind of embarrassing. And it's also, as marketers, embarrassing because we're supposed to be measuring things and we're supposed to have visibility of things and we're supposed to have all these answers to things. So that's usually that moment where it starts to become real. And that's why, I want to start bringing Aaliyah into this conversation because, Aaliyah, this was really your reality at one point, right? So I'll hand over the baton to you if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Connor, and maybe tell us a little bit about, what this looked like for your team, Aaliyah, because you had a great story that you had shared with us, and I'd love for you to share that with the rest of the group too.
Sure. So yeah, before moving to Workzone, we had a project management tool, but it was really subpar. It was pretty much the cheapest one you could get. It was called Pro Workflow. I bet there's no one here who's heard of it. If you have, I'd be shocked. And it was my predecessor who found that tool, and that was only the creative side of the house using it. So I mentioned those other groups, strategic communications and marketing. They weren't marketing. Some of the people were on our creative side of the house tool, and then the Stratcom team had signed up for Asana and were using it very differently. And so they had to be in both tools to see anything. But at the same time, we didn't have any way to there was no markup tool within that. So any sort of proof approvals, that kind of thing, it was happening through email. We had shared drives. Everyone was using Box or, OneDrive or all these different things. So files were all over the place. And some people didn't like any of the tools and they were using their own tool and duplicating everything that they did within that platform as well. So what this led to was a lot of people, duplicating efforts, as Shannon referred to earlier. We didn't know that Stratcom was working on a social media plan. They didn't know that we had created artwork for an event. They couldn't, there was no efficiency there. They couldn't grab our art because they didn't know it existed, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's so hard too when the approval chain is in emails or across multiple tools, because at least for me, that's like one of my biggest bottlenecks is the approvals being pushed through, making sure everybody's on the same page. That would be super difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and on top of that, it's hard to track edits. So that was a problem, without a markup tool to keep track of which edits were requested. There were a lot of people making the same edits in separate ways, and then somebody had to consolidate all of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Was there a specific moment, Aaliyah, where the light bulb went off and you're just like, this stuff that we're doing right now as you were going through that process, like isn't sustainable? Like, was there a light bulb moment for you that triggered everything?
Well, the light bulb for me went off probably years before I was able to convince other people. So I think that it was something that I could see we could be smarter and work more efficiently. But I was actually going back and looking through my notes this morning to try to figure out what the catalyst was that finally made it happen. I think I wore people down. That's what I did, is I just kept talking about it. And at a certain point, I kept telling our vice chancellor why this would make a difference. And she bought into it, and I got other people on the team on board with it. They could see the potential. And then when there was an opportunity, we put it on our short list of items for the next fiscal year to make happen. So it kind of was a slow roll getting there, although that's been my experience here. I've been here almost 19 years, and every other tool we've been kind of slow to get to adopt. We still don't have a digital asset management system. We didn't have a content management system for our website long after most people had them. So it's been knowing this environment and how slow we've been traditionally to adopt these things. I will say that over time, the more you do that, the more people get used to it, the more you can find a process that works and speed that up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the
absolutely.
difference is between like higher education and the private sector with that sort of thing? Like, how much more is the process in depth, or how much more do you have to go through?
Well, it's definitely slower in higher ed. It's funny, people will say things take forever in higher ed, but I also think in some way, it's not like you're any less busy that whole time. You're busy the whole time. It's just more hoops to go through. So, we have to plan for things in advance. Budgets are being worked on way in advance of the fiscal year, which means you need to be making your case enough in advance to sell somebody on it, to find the funding. And something that's been challenging, at least at our institution, because we've been growing a lot over the last, 10 years that I've been here, we've been growing and kind of moving up in the world. But that means we came from a place of, our leadership in the past was very much, oh, budgets are tight, we're going to tighten that belt, tighten the belt. It wasn't very visionary until our current chancellor came and is finally seeing that we have to elevate what we're doing in order to be seen in the way we want to be seen. And so you have to make that case and find the budget. And sometimes now we have a strategic funding model that there is some money kind of at the top that the chancellor and provost manage that we can make a case for. Within our team, we also have a revenue chargeback model. So that also gives us a little cushion. So there's ways to find the funding, but I feel like that conversation, you also have to go through procurement, and we're part of a system of other universities, and that is shared. So that means it has to be approved there. It has to be approved by our shared IT, that it is, vetted, and that it's a, secure tool that we can use. And so there's a lot of steps that can take months, honestly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you brought up a good example in terms of like where that shift occurred, right? So even though you didn't have a real, I mean, you had a process in place, right? You knew how work needs to get from point A to point Z, and you identified like the solution wasn't just finding a better tool, but in a lot of cases, and with a lot of these stories that I hear from others very similar, is, you have to step back and really think about how that supplemental way to help make sure things run smoother. Um, and I think when that becomes available in terms of finding a tool or a solution to make things run smoother in an existing whatever that process is, it just becomes more visible and you get less of those isolated issues or less chaos and more opportunity for people to understand where things are at in the process so that you can make sure that, the visibility is in front of everybody, if you will, including leadership, right? So we talked about leadership coming in and asking questions and needing to be able to talk to leaders and explain to them what is going on as an important part of the process as well. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, you froze for a second, I think.
Okay, okay. My apologies. My power just went back on, so there might have been some hiccups between me being logged in on my phone, me being logged in on the webinar. So can you still see and hear me though?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Okay. So Connor, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. One of the things I wanted to highlight really is, instead of always trying to fix individual issues, which we all get kind of tied up into, right? And that list becomes very long in itself. You have to take a step back and just kind of look at how things should overall operate, right? That's the main thing. Like, how should we be operating as an organization and as a team? And so I would love to find out, Aaliyah, kind of like, or really just walk us through like how you approach that, right? So if you go to the next slide, Connor, I think one of the things that would be interesting to talk about is like when you started to make the case for change, right? Like you probably, I'm assuming, Aaliyah, had at some point said, this isn't working, right? We need to change something. And now we need to figure out what we're going to do to change that. What got leadership's attention, or was leadership even involved in that process from the beginning and kind of working with you to help solve for this?
Yeah, so I would say that it was kind of chipping away at some assumptions. our leadership wasn't in our project management tool as much, so they didn't see what wasn't happening. But one of the big challenges we had was that it was incredibly difficult to update timelines once they've been created, which seems ridiculous. That is like the core thing that a project management tool does. But I would say, unfortunately, it came to light in some cases through issues that arose. So, a project that got off track, or in most cases, one where we wanted to be able to hold one of our clients accountable to a timeline, but because things weren't always up to date within our tool, it was hard to do that. It was hard to make the case for where they had missed deadlines. And so then we ended up having to make up the difference always. And so when we had sort of fact-finding conversations about what went wrong, often I was able to say, you know, if we had a tool that could track this better, this would make everything easier to go back and say, hey, here's where things got off track, or for us to keep people on track while we're going through a project. So there are a few examples of that. I think it was a lot of it was drawing those connections between an issue that had come up, like we didn't make these edits that they expected us to make. Well, when our edits are scattered among all these different formats, it's really hard to keep track of those things. And so it increases error in the process. So drawing those lines between everything. And then I would say it wasn't even just leadership, honestly. I mean, I don't know that there was pushback from leadership ever. It was more about, we don't have the money. That was the biggest thing. So being able to find a way to make a case for how this would save us time and money, we'd be more efficient. And then we had, you know, some turnover within the team. And as we got new marketing people on board, they sort of act as account executives. They're the primary contact for clients. And as we got people who had worked in the corporate world, worked in other areas who had tools like this, they could see the difference. And so then I was able to get more people on my side. And so our vice chancellor is hearing not just from me, but multiple leaders within the team who are frustrated and see the potential that how much a tool could revolutionize things. That was incredibly important when it came to the side of the team that I don't oversee, that was working in a different tool. And those people were really instrumental in making a case for bringing us all together. But some of it is just planting the idea of possibility, like what it could be, how it could work if we were all together.
Yeah, I love what you said about building a case, right? And I think that's an important tip for our audience, because many times problems come into the mix and everybody gets so frustrated by those problems that they take it to leadership without having that case framed out in terms of, here's what we're experiencing, right? Here's how it's impacting the business. Here's how it's impacting our employees, without ever, here's how we need to fix it, right? And so I love how you said you built a case. Was there anything, and this is for you too, Kendall, because I know you've gone through a number of situations in the past where you've had to speak to leadership about how you can solve for the issue that existed. But is there anything like the language or the way you framed it to leadership or the case that you built that just helped you get over that finish line? I know you have a very supportive leader to help you with this, but you know, a lot of us in the past and even on the call today might be struggling with, like, how do I bring this leadership? Is there a tip you could recommend for everyone?
I think the accountability portion is really important because it brings several aspects into play, which is that one of the reasons I've experienced that leadership gets frustrated is when they don't have transparency and they don't know what's going on. So they don't know where the resources of the department are going. You can't point to anything and say, okay, well, I worked on this for 20 hours this week and my team worked on this for 20 hours this week and we don't have bandwidth for anything else. You can't just keep piling on. But without leadership being able to see that and also know that, like, sometimes when things fall behind, it's not your fault, right? Like if you have that chain where, you know, you're waiting for your print approval to come in and you're stuck, you know, your boss won't look at you and say, okay, well, this is your fault for not moving it along, when they can see that you've done your best and you're trying, but it's not your fault. So that is really important to me, because I find when leadership gets unhappy, it's because expectations haven't been met.
Mm-hmm.
And usually that's because there's not transparency into what's going on.
Yeah. And Connor, if you wouldn't mind forwarding to the next slide, I think it kind of gives an overall summary to some of the talking points that we're talking about right now as well. But would also love to hear from you, Aaliyah, in terms of the whole how you framed and how you got that case and what was successful.
Yeah, so I think, the accountability is definitely important. I would say another aspect of it that our leaders always looking for is data.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really hard to get data out of our old tool, and the data only included my part of the team. And so then the other side of the team who was trying to say we would do these year-end reports every year for our key major clients, and we would have to do a lot of manual crunching of data that took an incredible amount of time. And that alone is something that I used to help make a case that we could do this much faster if we had a tool that was all of us in the same place, and we could pull those reports and combine it and share it with people. And also, you could go in and look at it at a dashboard at any time and kind of have a sense for where things are. All of those things help to make a case, because our vice chancellor is also reporting out to the chancellor, and then we also report to the system. So there's all these requests for data in different ways. So I think that one was really important. It's something that they're on the hot seat for. They have to deliver. And so if we can make that easier and more reliable, that was important as well. But I think we've had a conversation as we're growing as an institution, as we're professionalizing a lot of the things that are happening within the university. That means more and more projects, more and more work. We're constantly at our threshold and capacity. And so that's been another part of the conversation as well, is how do we make a case for that? How do we prove that we're at capacity? How do we even know? Like, how do we track that?
Yeah, I think one of the important things too that you mentioned there is scale too. Things that work on like a small team that only has small projects, like break down completely once you start growing and moving on to bigger teams and bigger projects. And ideally you want to set yourself up to scale initially, but like that never happens. Let's just be honest. You run into the problem and then you're like, okay, I need a solution. This wasn't built to scale. How do I set myself up for success now in the future?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that scale is going to provide some kind of outcome, right, Kendall? I mean, if we think in terms of how leaders think, like they're thinking in terms of the big picture, the outcome, like what is the result of this going to do for me? And you talked about a little bit, Aaliyah, in terms of like capacity and resources. I mean, I've had to, in many cases, go back to leadership and say, you know what, we just can't meet all of these requests that we're getting. We need to hire more people. And what's the first question that you're going to get from your leader is, well, show me how many hours everybody is working and show me how many projects are being requested. And then let's take a look at what we're getting from a return, right? The outcome is the return on that investment. So in order to invest in a team, you have to be able to prove some kind of an outcome. So I think those are all very important points that were made. And I think the other thing that we want to go into a little bit too is, alignment around the problem, and, it has to make sense. And I talked about it a couple of, slides ago about, how the work should run and how the process looks. And when you have this alignment with your leadership, then it a lot of times makes sense to kind of step back and look at how that work should actually run. And I think in your case, Aaliyah, it works where you've already, had that somewhat of a decision made before you had like the fine details of a process figured out, but you still had a process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some teams, some organizations will, look at a process first and then look at a tool like a Workzone to figure out, well, how can this then meet some of those criteria of our process? So, it works a couple of different ways. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide for me, Connor, I'd be interested in just kind of finding out a little bit more in terms of like how you define like how things should work. Once you have this tool, you've made the decision, you got the leadership buy-in, right? And when you look at what that process looks like, what were some of the first things that changed and how to flow when started working the benefits of this decision?
Broke up a little there, Shannon, but
Yeah, I think we get the
Yeah, I was
question.
just asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to go back and figure out, kind of where those first things changed, like how it flowed, how the work
Mhm.
flowed, like, um, just finding a tool, then get a tool. So, like, once you made that decision, whichever one it was, how did that work start to actually flow with visibility, with buy-in, with teams accountability? Just would love to hear some of your successes.
Sure. Okay. So when I took on this role originally, I'd previously been just over the website of the house and then moved into this role where I was over the whole creative side. And I did a lot of work on process with the team and trying to make sure we were having conversations when requests came in. Is this something we should be doing? Is this strategic? Where does it fit within our priorities? That kind of stuff. So I did a lot of work around that with the team. I can't say that I did it alone. It was a team effort. But when we talked about getting a new tool, it's almost like our process had been evolving to a point where we realized our current tool was not meeting the, we were having to do everything manually when we knew there were tools out there that would do a lot of those things in a more automated way. So, for example, we had a really clunky request form for new projects, and it didn't allow us to ask all the questions we needed to know in order to make those strategic decisions. So, we knew we needed a tool that could meet some of those needs, could allow us to customize request forms and streamline that process, streamline the approval process of new jobs before they even get opened. Um, we also knew, of course, the markup thing was a problem. That was a gap. We had our editing process already kind of in our process documentation, but we didn't know how to make that work within a tool that didn't do any of those things for us automated.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some
Mm-hmm.
aspects that we kind of had earmarked, like, boy, would it be nice to have. We know this stuff exists out there. The thing that I would say at this stage that I wish I would have spent a little more time on, although I wouldn't have done it any other way, and sometimes you can't pick your timing, right? Like we got
Right.
the backing, the support, and I didn't have a lot of time to interface with our strategic communications team who had been using a different tool. We certainly vetted choosing a tool with them, but I had not really been aware of all their processes to a detail level that when we got ready to roll out a new tool, we ended up having to spend more time making sure everything aligns. And so I would say that's probably a thing that we could have done better in this process, that we could have spent a little more time aligning across that whole cross team thing before we even got into the tool. Although sometimes you don't know what's possible until you have the tool. So it's sort of a chicken egg thing.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And I think it's easy to sit here and be like, my team was wasting so much time doing like manual data pulling, and like it's crazy how much time that can take. Like once you sit down and do it, and it's hard not to think while you're doing it, like what could I be working on instead that's like driving awareness, or this other huge project that I'm working on, but I am stuck here pulling all this data for hours and hours, sometimes once a month, sometimes once a quarter, sometimes once a week, and it adds up like crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've been doing this for 20 plus years, guys, right? And I've seen this all the time. When it comes to process, there has to be at least some kind of a clear process in place, right? Because problems are going to exist no matter if you have a tool or not have a tool. The tool just reinforces the same problems in a lot of cases. So it's really important to, have that more methodical, very structured process in place so that when you do institute a tool, or in your case, Aaliyah, you had a process in place and you implemented a tool, you had some visibility concerns across different teams. Sometimes those problems continue forward even with just a new tool. And a lot of that goes down to, the whole idea of change, right? So if we wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Connor, I want to talk about that changing from a solution to a solution, and then also changing to, you know, to introducing new change to people that are within the organization. So when you were going through that process, Aaliyah, and looking at a solution or even evaluating the solution, is there something that mattered the most in the end? Like, for example, you talked about you built the case. Was there
Mhm.
certain criteria that you used that you said, these are the most important? I know you talked about the request form, you talked about markups and approvals. Like, is there anything that you learned during this process of evaluation that seemed to stand out as the most important, and what made that final decision feel right for you?
I I don't know that I can say that there was one thing that stands out as most important, but I will say that you asked earlier about how things are different in higher ed. Well, this step right here, I can illustrate how they're different. You have to have, in higher ed, shared governance is a thing. And so there's a lot of building this shared understanding of what we're doing. And so the first thing, once I was told, go find a project management tool, the first thing I had to do was to get a little committee together within our team of people who would be the key decision makers within each of those different areas, and bring everybody together. And we came up with a list of requirements. And so I would say each team might have had a different top priority as far as requirements go. How we organized it is I had a list of these are the things that we must have. These are like non-negotiable. So some of those things you mentioned, Shannon, are things that we had on the must-have list. Then there were some nice to haves. There are things that, boy, this could really help, but if we don't get it, it's not the end of the world. And then there were some that we just kind of had another area where when we did demos with different platforms, we would hear about things we didn't even know existed. And so we would add those down there as, wow, I didn't even know this was an extra thing. And we might have to go back to the other tools and say, do you have this too? And compare and contrast. But I'd been through this process already a couple times at this point. With our content management system for the website, and also one for a platform for our alumni website. So I developed this process where I'd come up with a requirements list. We would do demos, as part of our procurement process. If something is over a certain amount of money a year, a contract, you have to make sure you get multiple bids. So we met with multiple products, and what I did is kind of like a checklist. I would ask about all of those requirements in each one. And then as we went through all the demos, usually this kind of small working group was the one that would have all the demos. And then we would bring in our leader kind of towards the end, and I would show her this document. And each, like, sometimes if it's really complex, I would break those requirements down into like subsections. In this case, I just had them all in one list, and then I marked each product as sort of, I even color coded it because I'm about design backgrounds. So I would like say, this one meets or exceeds what our requirements were. This one doesn't quite meet them all, but meets some or whatever. And I made it into a document that she could read. She hates spreadsheets, so I had to turn it into something really digestible. So that was kind of what that process looked like. And having representatives from every key area really helped, that we felt like we thought of the whole situation from every angle.
Did you run into any challenges? I hear a lot more today, Aaliyah, because of getting involved with like procurement, having to do all these standard processes with bids. Did you have any challenges with IT? Because I know IT
Oh,
now
yeah.
plays a big role.
Well, with my background on the website, I always know that that's step one. We have to fill out a request form with them to review it and to do a security scan and all of that kind of thing. And I know you don't wait on that until the end. You do it immediately because their process can be slower than the rest sometimes. Another thing that is a factor we often look at, in this case, it didn't really make a difference for us, but because we're part of a system of institutions, sometimes we're looking to see, does anybody else on one of the other campuses, do they have a tool like this already in place? Is it already approved by IT? Especially when you're trying to find something that you need to onboard quickly, that can really leap you ahead. So that's something that often is a thing that I will look for when we're starting this process. It can also make a case to leadership, this other, there's people you can talk to within the institution that are already using it. The other thing, a plus about higher ed, is I find that most people within higher ed are willing to help each other out, even at other institutions. So if I know another institution that we're familiar with, or I have a contact at that I've met at conferences or whatever, I may reach out and or on a forum and see what other people think, and that can also help make that case.
Yeah, that's a great tip, great idea. Well, anything on your end, Kendall, in terms of, I'm sure being on that side of Workzone, what are there certain things that you hear in these processes that a lot of companies are looking for that might, trigger some, oh, we haven't thought about that.
I mentioned this before, but adoption is a huge issue. And it doesn't matter what project management system you use. If you can't get everybody to use it, it becomes obsolete almost immediately, because then you end up in the same boat you were in before, Leah, where you have like OneDrive and maybe some people are using Asana and, so I think getting buy-in before is really smart, because I think a lot of leaders, especially like more in the private sector, will come in and say, okay, well, this is the tool I use, so everybody has to use it. And they don't really care if everybody's on board. But I think approaching it from the direction you guys approached it, Aaliyah, where you're saying, okay, well, these are our requirements, these are your requirements, how do we meet in the middle and find something that works for all of us, I think is a really important step that gets like passed over a lot, and obviously can make a huge difference on the back end, because like I said, if you can't get everybody to put all of the work in your project management system, doesn't matter how much work you do beforehand. So
Yeah.
And I would say I'm kind of getting ahead of us, but I think that that's an ongoing challenge. You get everybody to adopt it when you first roll it out, but then people leave. You get new people in. They had an experience with a different tool. They liked it better. It's a constant, it's a discipline. You have to make sure you're continuing to monitor it, and you have to make sure when people send something via email, you say, hey, this needs to go into our project management tool. We really need to stop these conversations outside of it. Or you're having a team's conversation to come to a decision, but that decision needs to be in the project management tool. I feel like I still have those conversations all the time, because it is, people need constant training and reminders. And if you look away for a minute, things start to drift. But it makes a big difference if everyone's talking in the same place.
Yeah,
and
I think
Yeah.
I think it's important to have that champion too, because I do the same thing with my team too, in Workzone or in HubSpot, because once you get to the reporting part, like that data integrity, it becomes key. And if there's something missing, it can throw your whole report off. And nobody wants to be in the shoes where you're scrambling at the end of the month because somebody else was using 5 different tools. So, yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, and you really segued quite smoothly into our next slide. If you wouldn't mind going to it, Connor, because that's exactly what we're talking about right now is, this rollout and the importance of making sure the team can buy into it as well. Every one of us is resistant to change. It's just part of nature, right? You're used to doing things a certain way for a long period of time. You don't want somebody coming in saying, hey, drop everything you did before, right? We're going to look at this particular tool and we want you to work this particular way. Nobody likes to be told that. So what I'd love to hear, Aaliyah, is, where did you see the most resistance when you started to roll this out? I know you talked earlier about you had 2 different teams on 2 different tools, and obviously you combined forces, right? And found this new tool and a new way to work. Did you get resistance? And if you did, like, how did you overcome some of that?
Yeah, what worked out for us is at this stage, we already had we're close to a contract with Workzone. So we were far enough along that we could we could rely on the support within Workzone as well, which turned out to be very helpful because while my side of the house had a really heavily documented and refined over many years, even predating me in this role, we had this process that had been ironed out pretty well. The other side of the house had only had a tool at all for a few years, and it worked the way they liked it, but they'd never really been challenged on the way. They hadn't really refined it from there or taken that next step. And so I would say the pushback that happened in the process is we would run into situations where they wanted to do a thing that I'd never tried to do with a tool. It was a different need that our side of the house just didn't have. The key thing was calendars. They wanted to be able to track all of their social media posts, all their emails, and they needed a way to do that across the team. And they'd done it a certain way in their previous platform, and they didn't know how to switch to this. They couldn't figure it out on their own. And so we leaned on support to troubleshoot with us. And that's how we broke through, is we found some solutions that we, since we were so new to the platform, we wouldn't have necessarily figured out. We knew that the platform could do, in theory, the thing we wanted, but we just didn't know how to execute it. And so I think thinking about the onboarding of a tool is really important. The onboarding process took longer maybe than some places, although I will say my vice chancellor, when I first was feeling the pressure and I was like, well, we'll get it done in, a few months, she said, are you sure? I want to get this done right, because I think that's a key part about getting people to adopt it well, is that it needs to be functional. You don't want so many people in there when it's still half broken or we're still working on it, because when do you finish working on it? You're always refining things. And so if you bring them into something that isn't really ready for them, it can lead to a lot of frustration. And some people may give up before it's even fully baked. So what we did is we had the small working group really working at integrating our processes into the platform for about 5 to 6 months, honestly. It's some of it started with just conversations before we looked too much at the tool, and then we got into it and we knew we needed to make request forms, that kind of thing. And the other thing that was really beneficial is we knew one of the clients that we knew would have the biggest impact of a new tool was our admissions client. And so we ended up bringing that whole team on board early. So we did what we kind of called it a beta test of the platform, our forms, our timelines, all of that. And they were in there like maybe a couple months, a month and a half, something like that. So then what we did is we built advocates. People were going, wow, this is so much better than what we were doing before, or talking to other people on the team with their firsthand experience of how much difference it was making for them. And that made a big difference on adoption. We still had pushback, I would say, for people. Our previous tool, because timelines were so broken, we had a subset of people who didn't think that timelines had value, if you can believe it. And so it was really about saying, no, this is part of your job and you need to do it. Sometimes a little tough love. You got to say, this is why this matters and that this is protecting you.
Yeah.
But as we moved forward, we just kind of addressed each thing as they came up.
I love that advocate point. At least, especially as a marketer, the ideal state is that you don't have to market anything yourself. Everybody else does it for you, right? And so that's really important in adoption. And I hadn't thought about that before, where if you get these advocates on board, it makes your life so much easier, because it's not just you convincing everybody we need to change this.
Right.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of that pivot point, if you will, where it's either going to stick, right, and everybody's going to be on board. They're going to be like, yes, this is fantastic, we love it, or it doesn't, right? There's usually kind of one side or the other. You love it or you don't like it. So those are some very excellent tips and ways in terms of how to acclimate people to this change. And I think what you had said, Aaliyah, in terms of just, getting them in early, right? Figuring out how to roll this out early rather than I've seen a number of situations in the past where even some CMOs who have worked at other companies will come into an organization, regardless of current process, regardless of what's working on, them coming in and saying, hey guys, I use this particular platform or tool at this place. We're going to start to use it now. And everybody's like, oh, hold on, wait a second. We're very comfortable with what we're doing now. But, those decisions typically don't help with keeping people and their morale up, because now that change has an immediate effect, right? And there was no process in place prior to get them acclimated and introduced to something as significant as this type of a change. So very, very excellent points and great conversation there. And so as we look at kind of the before, we've kind of gone through the different steps, Aaliyah, and what you did. And what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about how that's different now, right? So you had this before, you know what it was like, you tackled it head on, you fixed it. How do things feel now compared to before? Like, what's that normal work week look like? And how has that visibility changed? And how has leadership kind of, accepted this new, this new future for the organization? Maybe give us a little insight into that if you won't mind.
Sure. So I think from a day-to-day basis, I think the tool is trusted, at least on my side, who had we had a tool that didn't have a lot of faith before. And now we know that's the first place to go. And so that's not only can people who are, like in my position go, did you look at Workzone? Like that's the thing I can say to people to make sure that they're checking and to reinforce that habit. But also, yeah, if it's in there, then it's something that's information that can be trusted. What's in there is something you can trust. I can't say that we're 100% of where we want to be. There's always further to go. There's always more to do. We still have things that we have like on our roadmap that we want to implement within the tool. But we've come a long way in making communication, like it's a source of truth. All the communications live there, the decisions live there. People know if they have a question, they can find answers. And our vice chancellor is as big of an advocate of that as anybody. Someone else within the department was saying, I just don't know how to find this. And my vice chancellor went and looked and said, I just found it. Here's how I look, So I think that makes a big difference too, making sure you have your champion at the top who's enforcing it, because if they're not on board, then things can erode and people can start falling back into old patterns. And then I would say, because I mentioned data before and how personally that's a big thing because I'm always pulling data from my leader. We've already had several examples where that's paid off. So one example is that a few months ago, there was this survey of all shared services units, and some of the feedback was troubling. As it turns out, there were a lot of reasons for that, but our chancellor wanted to know what was going on. He's been on an efficiency kick. He's trying to make sure everybody's doing things in a way that makes the most sense. And so our vice chancellor reported out to him, and he was very impressed by the tools that we have in place, the way that our process is set up. So it felt like sort of validation of all the work we'd put in to get here. And we were also able to call out, here's areas where the work that we have has changed, including, Chancellor, your work. You have increased your requests by, 150% in the last couple of years. So that means that's new work that we didn't have on our list, and it trumps other things. So how do we get it all done? So it was great to have the data there to make that case. And then with one of our clients that's also growing, our foundation, we just recently had a conversation with them and talked a lot about how the nature of the work that we do for them has changed, and started making a case how we need some support in some areas that they keep growing the number of projects they do with us. And so we're starting that conversation looking for solutions, but I think that we're able to have those conversations more quickly. We can kind of turn it more quickly, but also we can hold people accountable to things that before we couldn't. When they miss timeline steps, it's all right there. We can see every time the timeline was updated, there's a note. So we can see when things change, and you can add additional detail if you want to, like why did that change happen or whatever. And then I just found out last week that our student affairs division is interested in a shared email calendar and they want us to demo Workzone for them. So it's possible, that there will be other groups on our campus who might be interested in using it too. They know we have a solution that's working
Mm-hmm.
and they want to save the time of going through all the research and the things we did to get there and see if they can take advantage of it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of times it comes down to just having the ability to get that clarity, right? And really understand kind of how that work is happening within the organization and then just making that visible. I mean, it sounds really simple, right? We talk about visibility, but it really is an important part of everything we do, right? Being able to address things and have access to information and data, like you had said earlier, Leah, so that you can see what's going on and know what's going on so that you can explain to your chancellor, right, that the requests have increased by 150%. And there's your business case, right, for maybe we need to prioritize or maybe we need to, hire some more resources to account for that. And so if we go to the next slide, Connor, what I want to do is, talk about where everybody on this call, forward two now, I think it is. There it is. Thank you. Everyone that's on this call today is probably sitting somewhere in this journey that we talked about today. Probably dealing with a lot of the same issues that you, Aaliyah, described, just maybe at different stages. So instead of going like deeper into the process, I want to make this kind of really practical. So if someone's listening and thinking, this sounds exactly like us, is there one thing that they should do, this week to get them moving in the right direction? Or, is there a big mistake that they should avoid? Or is there a rule that, they should set early? Can you maybe give us just a few quick tips to kind of give everybody the same ammunition they need to, make
Mhm.
some of this big change, if you will?
I think that process is something we should always be looking to evolving and improving. And so I think always keeping that top of mind and focusing, I do think there's this tendency to look for a tool to be the magic bullet.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I've got someone on my team who is very much that way. She's very eager, is always finding, oh, did you hear about this new tool? Did you hear about that new tool? And you can add more tools, and that just adds more work in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways to complicate things. And so I do think auditing what you're using currently is an important thing to say, are we using some of these tools do the same things? Should we be consolidating into one of them rather than duplicating things across? I think sometimes you let people just do what their preference is.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that, but if that is compromising your ability to see everything in one place, then is that worth it, that ability to let people, decide for themselves? You have to kind of weigh those things. But I do think spending some time imagining what things could be like, maybe a list of pain points even
Mm-hmm.
is a good place to start. Where
Mm-hmm.
are the places that our process is breaking down? Is there a tool? Is it something that a tool could fix? Is it something that we need buy-in for? Because one of the things I know we've talked about for years that is still on my roadmap to implement more fully, we have some clients that we work with who abuse the revisions step of the process. We had somebody who had 37 rounds of revisions, which is just incredible and not efficient in any way. So one of the things you can do with the tool is track those things. You can
Right.
say, it tells you how many versions you're up to now. And so that's something you can make a case about more easily if that's a pain point that you have. It's harder, I think, when you're doing this in so many different ways and you're not doing it all on the same platform, because then you say, what is a round of revision? Well, they sent me an email, but then they also dropped off some other hand edits, or, we
Mm-hmm.
hadn't made the edit yet. So is that a different round of revision or not? That things get confused. And I think the more that you can have a consistent way of tracking those things makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, I'm kind of rambled a little bit, but I
No,
don't know if I answered your question.
yeah, I think you did, and I think that one rule you brought up a couple of times here, that teams should set early. It's like building that business case, right? And I think if you add on like a rule A and B would be just getting people involved early, right? I think doing those two things really
Yeah.
helps a lot of success in organizations. I've seen it before. Uh, the business case, make sure people understand what they're getting into and how they're going to approach it early. Those can really set teams and organizations up for success very, very well if you do those two things.
Another thing
Yep.
I would just add that kind of ties it when you talk about getting people involved early, something that I've continued to do, even though we've found a platform we like, I think making opportunities for feedback is really
Mhm.
important because that helped to lead to making a business case in the first place. I knew that there were people who had shared frustrations, right? So I
Yep.
was able to find that out. And I think sometimes we get so busy doing the work or we say, well, this is how we've always done it. It's hard to sometimes to make space for feedback, but that's something we've continued to do. We check in periodically about Workzone and say, is this still working for us? Do we need to change the way things are set up? Is there something that we'd like to have? And then you can also be sharing some of those things with the product and saying, is this on your roadmap? This is something that would make a big difference for us. So I think that's an easy way to start the process of getting people involved is just to make time for feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. So Connor, if you won't mind going to the next slide, please. Before we jump into Q&A, I just want to mention a couple quick things. We built a business case, guys, for this exact process. So you're going to get that as a follow-up to this webinar. So look forward to that. And if you really want to see how this kind of structure that Aaliyah and Kendall were talking about today, give Workzone a call, right? Talk to somebody, connect with somebody. There's even a free trial that they have right now that you can explore. So take advantage of it and go try, put some of these ideas in practice. And what I want to do quick is just zoom out for a real quick second and just step back from everything we talked through. And I want to give you a couple of key things to take away. And the first one is most teams aren't broken because of effort, right? We all know we put in our 100% effort. They're broken really because the work isn't structured sometimes in a way that just makes it visible. I talk about this word visible or manageable, right? It's very simple. It sounds simple. It is simple. And it's not, what a lead wasn't just picking a tool. It was really getting clear on like how this work should run, who should be involved, how to do it, how to talk to leadership. Like her journey is a perfect example of how to implement a new work project management software like Workzone as a tool into an organization. And when that becomes very clear, everything else just falls into place. And that's really the shift. It goes from reacting to the work to actually managing the work. So next slide, please, Connor. I want to make sure we have a couple of minutes for some questions related to teams. I did have a couple come into my chat that I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer right away, guys, because I'm on my phone and I have some power issues. I only can see the slide in front of me. But one of the questions that came in, Aaliyah, is, a lot of teams feel these problems, but the leadership doesn't always see them in the same way as us. What actually made it click for leadership that something needed to change? And I think you might have talked a little bit about that earlier too.
Yeah, I think it is true. It's hard to sometimes, and it depends on how removed you are. I mean, everybody's organized in a different way. My VC is, I report directly to her, so I have a lot of access to her, so I was able to make a case. But and in this case, she ended up funding it out of our budget. So I mean, there are a lot of factors that can change that. Like if we had to go get strategic funding, we would have then had to go talk to the chancellor and there's other people who would have been involved in that approval process. But I think the the key is the same no matter who it is. You need to draw the connection between the things that they find frustrating and how a tool could solve that problem or improve the frustration or remove some of the frustration from the process. So finding, when they give you feedback or you can tell that they're having trouble with something or something went wrong and they're asking you what happened. You don't want to make excuses, but I do think you need to be able to say, here are some solutions that I have been wanting to move forward with that just require, these steps to get there. But I know that we could be more efficient. We could solve some of these problems, avoid this kind of runaround or whatever issues you're having. If you can draw that connection, I mean, I kind of turned into a little bit of a broken record with it, and you got to be careful about that sometimes, but it also does seem to make a difference. But I think the other aspect of it that, at least with stubborn leaders, is if you are a broken record and you're saying it all the time, they stop listening to you. So then that's where you need to build those other advocates. You need other people who are impacted. You need people who you're working with on the client side who are feeling the pain. Maybe they say, boy, it would be really nice if we had this visible. There's a lot of different places to find advocates, but you don't want to become the boy who cried wolf, kind of going over and over. You got to make sure that they're hearing it from multiple places, because you tend to tune people out.
Got it. One quick question that came through just now that they want to make sure they get answered before we drop is, and this is an interesting good one. It says, when you started this, was it more of a transformational project or was it gradual? Like, how long did it take before you started to see things improve?
That's a great question. I would say it was gradual in some ways. It depends on the aspect of it, because I think we saw an immediate improvement in visibility across the whole team. That was something we'd never had before, that the entire division was on the same platform, and that improvement was immediate. I think the gradual part was that we went through sort of a stepped process. We had this beta team who was in there early. And then we had a month sort of overlap where we were transitioning different rolling clients over from one platform to the other. We had kind of a gradual step by step. Each week we were moving a certain set of people over. And so that part took some time to get everyone there. And then getting everybody to understand it and know how to use it well, that part was gradual. Like, what's the best way to find things? There are a lot of different ways to filter and view information, and everybody has their preference. So I think the education took time, sharing tips and tricks across the team, saying, did you know you could do this? Or that you could set up this report to automatically share with you certain information, or save this as your home loading screen. This could make a difference. So I feel like some of those things were a little gradual, but I will say, part of what made that okay, because I know a lot of people are in a situation where you've made this case to leadership, you've said, this is going to make a difference, and they get impatient. Well, I thought it was going to fix this. It wasn't as, you have to set them up to understand it's a process and it will take time. And that was part of why I didn't feel so much pressure in that parts of this being gradual, because I'd already explained, you have to get people used to it. Until they're using it at full force, we're not going to be there yet. We're not really getting to see the benefit yet.
Absolutely. No, great question, great answer. And I know we're a few minutes over, guys, so I really want to thank you for joining us today. Special thanks to Aaliyah for sharing her story, her journey, her success in implementing this entire process, which is a fantastic story. And in terms of the process to go through for implementing a new tool, follow this step by step. Look for that business case template that's going to come through, guys. Thank you, Kendall from Workzone, joining in and adding some great commentary to the conversation. And a special thanks to Connor running our show in the background here as well. We hope you enjoyed the conversation today. Come back again next month for another great webinar. And we hope you have a great rest of the week, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.